Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon, President Park Geun-hye will embark on a 9-day visit to India and Switzerland Wednesday, where she will seek investments in Korea and closer ties in IT and other high-tech areas. The head of the ruling Saenuri Party vows to take steps to reform debt-ridden public institutions here in South Korea and improve human rights in North Korea. Plus, the U.S. and Britain will consider cutting off aid to Syrian rebels if they fail to attend the upcoming peace talks in Geneva to end the country's 3-year-long conflict. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon. Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at Noon. I'm Chae Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Bream. President Park Geun-hye is set to rack up some serious air miles as she embarks on a 9-day trip to India and Switzerland on Wednesday.
Our presidential correspondent Eoh Jin-joo tells us what she aims to accomplish during her state visits to the two countries.
President Park will focus on promoting her vision for a creative economy and securing greater foreign investment in Korea during her trip to India and Switzerland. In India, President Park will hold bilateral talks with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and discuss ways to further develop the two countries' cooperation in various fields, ranging from economic affairs to science and information communications technology. India is the world's second-largest market with a population of 1.2 billion and is currently moving ahead with a 5-year economic development plan that runs through 2017. The presidential office of Changwon says there is great potential in many areas for cooperation between Korea and India will be a key partner in helping Korea realize a creative economy, one of the Park administration's major goals.
India is globally competitive in high-tech industries such as IT and aerospace. Korea will sign MOUs with India in the fields of science, information and communications technology and aerospace during the president's visit to strengthen cooperation, especially in sectors related to the creative economy.
The president will also seek ways to upgrade the Korea-India Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which took effect in 2010, and urge the Indian government to support Korean companies, including POSCO, which has been working on a project in the Indian state of Odisha for 8 years now. President Park will be the first Korean leader to make a state visit to Switzerland. There she will hold a bilateral summit with President of the Swiss Confederation, Didier Burkhalter, and visit economic sites to benchmark Switzerland's vocational training system and its economic system, which is centered around small and mid-sized firms, all of which could be linked to her vision for a creative economy. The president will wrap up her trip at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where she will meet with the CEOs of global companies such as Cisco and Siemens and urge foreign businesses to invest in Korea. Eoh Jin-joo, Arirang News.
The chairman of Korea's ruling Saenuri Party has thrown his full support behind President Park's ambitious 3-year economic innovation plan. In a New Year's press conference Tuesday, Hwang Woo-yeol called for a rigorous reform of public corporations, saying many of them are poorly managed and weighed down with debt. He also pledged to boost domestic demand and foster the service sector. Regarding his party's healthcare policy, Hwang said the party wants to enable hospitals to form for-profit subsidiaries to increase revenue and improve management. He denied that doing so would privatize the health sector. In line with President Park's emphasis on reunification, Hwang said his party will start laying the groundwork for reunification, including the passage of a North Korea human rights bill in parliament. The government will make all-out efforts to streamline red tapes and ease regulations this year as it seeks to attract foreign investment and stoke domestic demand, particularly in the service sector. Our Ariel has more.
Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik says 2014 will be the year of regulatory reform, and all stumbling blocks to corporate investment will be removed. On Tuesday, during his first meeting this year with the heads of economy-related ministries and the leaders of the country's top 30 conglomerates, Yoon also vowed to stabilize the business environment and tackle the shortage of manpower at industrial sites. The minister stressed, however, that easing regulations is his main focus, in line with President Park Geun-hye's goal of deregulation to reinvigorate the economy. During her New Year's press conference last week, President Park said Korea should no longer depend solely on exports that have been waning, but rather expand domestic demand. She said one way to do that is to cut down on bureaucracy in the high value-added service sector so private investment can flow into promising areas of the economy. Deregulation has until now been mostly undertaken in the manufacturing sector. Yurian, Arirang News.
On the economic front, Korea's export prices dropped to their lowest levels in more than 5 years last month due to the appreciation of the Korean won. The Bank of Korea says that the country's export prices dropped 2.1% in December from the same period the previous month. The drop is also attributed to low sales of steady sellers such as smartphones and iron ore. Import prices also dropped by 3.5% in December from the previous year, marking the 16th straight month of declines. Import prices rose a mere 0.4% from the previous month, with a slight increase in the prices of oil and raw materials.
Korea's auto exports surged to a record high of almost $50 billion last year as local automakers expanded their presence in the luxury sedan market. Exports to the US also hit a record high in 2013. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
Korean auto exports reached a record high of $48.7 billion last year, despite production losses of billions of dollars following strikes by Korean auto workers. That is up more than 3% from a year earlier. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says that the nation's auto exports got a boost from sales of luxury sedans in advanced economies like the United States and the European Union. Exports to the U.S. in particular are estimated to exceed a record $12 billion in 2013, according to the Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association. The U.S. sales of luxury sedans produced by Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, including the Hyundai Genesis, jumped over 20% last year from 2012. The ministry said sales were also helped by a moderate economic recovery in the U.S., which pushed up auto demand, and Korea's free trade agreement with the EU, which raised the price competitiveness of Korean automobiles. Meanwhile, Hyundai Motor, the nation's largest automaker, is aiming to boost its market share in the U.S. to 4.7% this year from 4.6% in 2013, with its new Genesis and Sonata models driving gains. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Continuing on with part 2 now of our 5-part series on Korea's industrial competitiveness. This time we're going to take a look at the country's strong global reputation for building high-quality industrial plants. Korea's expertise in the field has been reflected in a steady rise of overseas orders in recent years. Ji Myung-gil reports.
Korean industrial plants have built up a track record of building plants ahead of schedule without creating safety problems. That helped Korean construction companies enter a phase of steady growth since their overseas plant orders topped $60 billion in 2010. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy forecasts the amount of overseas orders in 2014 to top $70 billion.
Hyundai Construction and Engineering expects to win mega projects this year by diversifying its bidding areas. We expect that more than 70% of orders will come from overseas this year.
Although orders from the Middle Eastern countries have been on the decline in recent years, market analysts expect new orders to emerge in the region this year on signs of the global economic recovery. Construction companies also plan to set their sights wider.
Korean construction companies are planning to target the Middle East and Asia this year. They want to build a large-scale oil refinery and petrochemical plants like this one, as you can see behind me. The Korea Plant Industries Association expects the global oil refinery market to grow by 4% this year and the next.
However, experts warn that although Korean construction companies have become globally competitive in oil refinery and petrochemical plant construction through massive projects in the Middle East since 1973, Korean construction companies are competing among themselves in cutthroat fashion.
We are facing competition, not just among ourselves, but also from Chinese, Japanese, and European construction companies. We need to diversify our markets and focus more on technology-integrated projects, like nuclear power plants, renewable energy plants, and civil infrastructure.
This year, the government plans to help finance Korean construction companies in the initial stages of the bidding process for overseas business projects and help companies expand their markets into Africa and Southeast Asia. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now to the latest on the rail strike that wrapped up recently. The leaders of Co-Rail's labour union say they will report to the police and take responsibility for last month's recent rail strike. Union leader Kim Young-hwan said in a press conference Tuesday that key union officials will drop into police stations and explain their actions to officers. 13 members of the union had taken refuge at the headquarters of the main opposition Democratic Party, the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, and a temple in Seoul after warrants were filed for their arrest, but those warrants were later revoked. The 22-day strike last month was the longest rail strike in Korean history, with union members protesting against what they said was a government plan to privatize the rail industry.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at Noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Ahead of her overseas trip this week, President Park Geun-hye reiterated that any North Korean provocation will be met with a very firm response. In an interview with CNN on Monday, President Park said further provocations have been predicted by experts at home and abroad, and that she puts the utmost priority on national security and safeguarding the South Korean people. Saying North Korea has become even more unpredictable after the purge of leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, she stressed on the need to prepare for every eventuality. With regards to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to a controversial war-linked shrine, the president said she hopes to form a future-oriented relations with Tokyo based on right understanding of history. A former security aide to U.S. President Barack Obama has called on Washington to pursue trilateral talks with South Korea and China on the future of the Korean Peninsula. In an interview with Seoul-based Yonhap news agency Monday, Jeffrey Bader said cooperation among the three is critical as the North Korean regime is becoming increasingly unpredictable. He said that whereas in the past China might have been reluctant to hold trilateral talks, Beijing may be more open to the idea now as the Chinese leadership has grown disillusioned with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Bader, currently a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, also called on Japan to take a serious look at history and recognize that its wartime atrocities were unacceptable. And moving now to the prospects of a unified Korea. In the first of our three-part series on reunification, our Hwang Sang-hee takes a closer look at how, despite the high price tag, reunification could benefit both Koreas.
For now, I am against reunification.
Other than mandatory military service, nothing really affects me, so I have no interest.
Realistically speaking, I oppose reunification for now.
A recent poll conducted by the Joseonilbo shows only 2 out of 10 South Koreans are supportive of a reunified Korea.
Most in South Korea say that reunification will just add to Seoul's economic burden. And in fact, a reunified Korea does come with a hefty price tag.
Figures released by the Korea Institute for National Unification show that the process of bringing the two Koreas together would cost South Korea an estimated $3.5 trillion. But President Park Geun-hye thinks reunification would be worth it.
저는 한마디로 통일은 대박이다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
A recent study shows reunification would fuel Korea's economic growth, making it the world's fifth most advanced economy by 2050, with a gross domestic product of $6.5 trillion. With South Korea's technology and North Korea's young population, a reunified Korea's per capita gross national income would increase from the current $23,000 in South Korea to more than $80,000 in 2050. But all this would be possible only under a gradual, peaceful reunification.
But if there are any disruptions affecting this transition process, for example, opposition to privatization, then the cost will increase, benefit will decrease.
But aside from the economic benefits, the single most important motivation for reunification stands.
Some of my relatives were separated from their families during the Korean War. When I see them, it makes me sad.
I don't know the details, but Korea is the only country that remains divided.
I think reunification is essential because one people should not be living with a dividend in between them.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Pope Francis continues to spread his message of peace and unity, this time calling on the two Koreas to work towards reconciliation on the Korean peninsula. In a speech to the Vatican Diplomatic Corps Monday, the Pope said he trusted that, for the good of all the Korean people, the interested parties will tirelessly seek out points of agreement. Francis also said he was gravely worried about the humanitarian situation in Syria and said urgent aid should be allowed to reach all parts of the country. He also pleaded for peace in Egypt, Iraq, South Sudan, Nigeria and the Central African Republic. Diplomats are trying to persuade the warring sides in Syria to firstly agree to show up at international talks in Geneva next Wednesday and secondly to take a series of steps to improve the atmosphere at the discussions. Kwon So-ah reports.
With around 1 week remaining until the Syria Peace Conference, known as Geneva II, kicks off in the Swiss city, the United States and Britain are pressing the Syrian opposition coalition to attend the talks, warning the coalition that they may stop supporting them to the extent they have if they fail to show up. This according to a senior official from the coalition who asked not to be named. He added other countries like France, Saudi Arabia and Turkey asked the coalition to come, but in a less assertive tone. Washington and London's stronger demand comes after the Friends of Syria, an international group who oppose Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, called for the Syrian opposition's attendance during a meeting in Paris on Sunday. Earlier, the rebels had said they would only attend if President Assad plays no role. The coalition says it will decide on its participation by Friday. The Assad regime has already submitted its list of attendees. It's also unclear whether Iran, which has a major influence in Syria, will attend, with deep divisions among world powers on that subject. The US and Britain say Iranian delegates can come to Geneva if they accept the call for a power transition away from the Assad regime, but Russia wants Iran there whatever the conditions. This according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who held talks with US Secretary of State John Kerry in Paris on Monday. Lavrov and Kerry were joined by UN envoy for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, where the three officials also talked about possible preconditions ahead of the peace talks.
But we talked today about the possibility of trying to encourage a ceasefire, maybe a localized ceasefire, beginning with Aleppo. And both of us have agreed to try to work to see if that could be achieved.
Possible prisoner exchanges and opening humanitarian access to besieged areas were discussed too, with the aim of creating a better atmosphere in Geneva. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Israel has paid its final respects to former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon at a state memorial service. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, top Israeli officials and around 20 international delegates paid tribute to Sharon Monday at the ceremony outside Israel's parliament. US Vice President Joe Biden, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Middle East International Envoy Tony Blair were among the international guests. The Israeli army says 2 rockets from Gaza landed in Israel prior to the service, but no one was injured. Sharon was later buried on a family ranch close to Gaza. Sharon, who died on Saturday at the age of 85 after spending 8 years in a coma, is remembered as a hero at home, but seen by many Arabs as a war criminal. School textbooks in the United States may soon identify the body of water between Korea and Japan by 2 names instead of 1. On Monday, an Education and Health Subcommittee of the Virginia State Senate unanimously passed one of the 3 pending bills to designate the sea, both the East Sea and the current Sea of Japan, in public school textbooks used in the state in the future. The other 2 pending bills contain similar stipulations and are also likely to be approved with strong bipartisan support. If passed by the full Senate, the bill will take effect on July 1st.
And time now to get an update on the weather with our Lee Ji-yeon at the Weather Center. Hello there, Ji-yeon.
Well, good afternoon, Mark and Yusan. Well, it's another cold day out there today, but it will still be 2 to 3 degrees higher than it was yesterday nationwide. Even so, the afternoon high in the Seoul metro area will stay at the freezing mark with mostly to partly sunny skies throughout the day. And there are still a cold wave advisory in effect in some of the inland areas, and there's also a cold wave warning in place in some parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-bukdo, so be sure to dress warm today before heading out. And if that weren't enough, some of the dry air advisory in the east have been upgraded to dry air warning, and health experts suggest to drink at least 7 to 8 glasses of water a day to stay hydrated and apply a good amount of moisturizer to keep skin soft. Meanwhile, it looks like cold and flu activity levels will be extremely high today as well, so be sure to take extra care of yourself so you don't get sick. Well, the cold snap looks to be eased up tomorrow afternoon, and temperature will snap back up to the positives in the Seoul metro area, and the warming trend will continue throughout the week as temperatures return to seasonal averages, but you probably still want to dress in layers with a scarf and gloves to keep yourself warm. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The high in Seoul will just get up to 0. Daegu and Gwangju will climb to 3, and Busan should top out at 6. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju will top out at 5, and Daejeon and Dokdo will get up to 1 and -1 respectively, while the top temperature on Kumgangsan Mountain will be at -8. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all from me today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Well, thank you very much for the weather there, Ji-yeon, and that does it for this Tuesday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Mark and I will be back tomorrow at the same time here in Seoul.